Good morning, church. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. It's such an honor to be able to worship God with each and every one of you. And at this moment, I invite you to separate yourself, maybe go into your room, go where you can be alone right now, because I believe that God has something amazing for us today. I believe that God has something powerful. I believe that God is going to touch you tremendously this morning. And I invite you to close your eyes. And at this moment, just take this time, take this service to worship, take the service to pray, take the service to just tell God how you feel or how grateful you are. And we're going to sing about His love because He's a loving Father. And I invite you to worship Him with me. Amen. Nothing can separate, even if I ran away, your love never fails. I know I still make mistakes, but you have no mercies for me every day. Your love never fails. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. The wind is strong and the water's deep, but I'm not alone here in these open seas, 'cause your love never fails. The chasm is far too wide. I never thought I'd reach the other side, but your love never fails. Say you stay the same. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. Whatever you're going through, can you declare that? You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. We believe it. You make all things work together for my good. So you stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Hallelujah. I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. That's how deep. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Sing it out. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. Na 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 na. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch's treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turned His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon His shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. Sing it out. It was my sin that held Him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ. Come on. His death and resurrection. Why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: His wounds have paid my ransom. But this I know with all my heart: His wounds have paid my ransom. His wounds have paid my ransom. And I pray that God may give you an amazing Sunday with your family, and that we may always remember how much He loves us. It's unconditional. Amen? God bless you.
Now we're going to move on to the next question we have, which is church and politics. We hear a lot about separating church and state, but what exactly is the role of faith in the political life? How do we think about politics and church? Do they mix? Is it like oil and water? They don't mix? What do you all think about that, especially given where we're at in our country politically? and by our country, I mean the United States of America. But more broadly, there's global conversations happening about rights, about the pandemic, about race and legislation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as religious leaders, what for you is the role of faith and politics, and how do the two interact? No pressure, just a light question.
I'm just going to throw out a brief thesis to get us started. That our calling as pastors is to help people become the best disciples of Jesus Christ they can be in all aspects of their life, which includes their political life.
So Mike, for you, it's about like being a whole person includes being a political person as well. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying the individual Christian doesn't, put their politics away when they come to church, and they don't put their faith away when they come to their political life. My goal as a pastor is to help people integrate faith into everything.
Okay, so integration is key for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
All right, so this is where I'll go. I had said that I have a very different view than most clergy people. And I have no problem if my church people watch this, because I say this openly from the pulpit. My famous phrases, and my associate pastor, I had said that we were doing these videos, and I had said that one of the questions that we were going to talk about was politics and religion. And she looked right at me and she says, "It's not our job to tell people who to vote for," because that is my famous line from the pulpit, that it's not my job to tell you who to vote for, but that it's my job to tell you to go and vote. And so when people ask me in private, I remind them of, because I'm Methodist, Wesley's 3 simple rules: that we are to do good, do no harm, and to love God. And that you should carry that with you. So Mike, kind of in a way, we line up here, that you carry that with you into the to the polling place when you go and vote. But that also, that as Christians, we are to be a people that seek love, we seek mercy, and we seek justice. That is basically our calling from Christ. But I'm not going to, from the pulpit, tell you need to go and vote for this person. At one of the previous churches that I have served in the past, because I'm at number 3 in my time of being a pastor, they used to put out documents as to, this person believes in this and this person believes in this. And I started throwing them away. And people started getting upset. And I just said, these are so one-sided. It doesn't even get into all the issues. I said, and we as a church do not endorse one person. That is not our job. Our job is to get people to go and vote. And they need to inform their own opinion, not based off of biased information. So anyway.
So Josh, if I can just ask a question.
Yeah.
You've articulated what I think is the attitude of almost all pastors I know. You think that's controversial?
We run in different circles, I think.
It must be.
My background is Bible college, right? And so I can tell you that is not the attitude of many of my friends, and many people that I went to undergrad with.
Yeah, I would actually say that I don't find that what you said, Josh. I don't find that controversial at all. And I'm pretty much in line with it as well. I think I was sort of raised and brought up in an academic culture. I don't want to get too jargony, but my favorite theologian is Karl Barth, which is not a surprise given where I went to school. But I mean, Barth's whole focus, and really what I understand to be the Christian way, is to prioritize following Christ, and then to make one's decisions in all areas of life, as Mike said, including political life, from that following. Now, how that happens, people are all along the political spectrum doing just that, because it's not cut and dry. It's not obvious. Although every person on that spectrum thinks that their way is the obvious way and the Christian way. But I think that if we're being honest, the Bible, Christianity can be and has been interpreted in so many different ways. And really, if people are following Christ, that's my goal. That's my highest aim and what I try to preach. I'd say in more recent years, I've been more exposed to like very progressive views where maybe that's not considered enough, and people need this idea that people need to be preaching on social issues from the pulpit. And to an extent, I agree. I think that Jesus did some very clearly social, political things, and there's nothing wrong with speaking to those issues. But I think speaking up and speaking out for justice is extremely important. And I actually did that on Sunday, so I really can't be shooting myself in the foot here. But what justice looks like is going to be interpreted differently by different people in the pews. Or behind their own screens, as the case may be.
Yeah, Emily, I think you hit on it. What justice looks like for different people is key, because I know for a number of individuals in my life, justice right now is defending the Second Amendment. Justice right now is defending free speech in terms of things that are being taken away, like the fact that Confederate monuments are being taken down. That right now for them is justice. And they are very, very heartfelt and serious in that Jesus would want them to go to the polling place with that in mind, that history right now is being torn down, and we need to keep that in mind when we go and vote. This question to me, and that's why when I prefaced it with, I have a very different answer than many of my colleagues and friends. I know that if my colleagues and friends watch this, a number of them are going to be very upset at me, very angry at me, and it is what it is.
So it sounds like, I'm hearing two really distinct but clear things. One is that there's really no such thing as a separation of faith and politics as a person. Like how we think about the world, how we engage the community, how we think about all these big deal things should, and indeed does, stem from how we view faith, virtue, how we view compassion. And the second thing, so that seems to be pretty reasonable, right? That the idea that somehow we can separate our faith at the polling station, it's not coherent. It doesn't make sense, because like how we view faith shapes the way we see the world, shapes the way we see community, shapes the way we see people, and all the other stuff.
Well, yeah, Brendan, I think you hit on it. It's about morals, mm-hmm. and for me, faith is what drives my moral compass, and for a lot of people in the pews, that's how we get our moral compass.
Yeah, which is so helpful, because that brings me to the second point that I'm hearing is so there's this thing like the fruits of the Spirit. So if you've ever been to Bible camp or grew up in the church, you might have heard it's a list of the attributes of a Spirit-filled Christian, or the attributes of what it means to live a faithful life. And the list is really a great list. Go Google it. I'm not going to jump into that too much, but what I noticed about that list is that every attribute of a faithful Christian is or requires relationship, that you can never do any of those things alone. It's always a communal effort. And That's interesting. I led a class on politics, political theology. And the first thing we talk about is we define politics as a conversation or a process of forming common life in community. That's what politics is. Anytime we form common life. So arguing over a potluck and figuring out who does the chairs and who sets up and takes down is a political act just as much as like voting for Congress. But this leads me to the second point, which is church is actually a place where we get to learn what it means to be just, what it means to be kind, how to live out love in a communal sense. That actually, from what and you guys can tell me if I'm hearing it right, is that church is a springboard for thinking about morality, thinking about communal formation. And actually, one of the church's job is to always be political in the sense of forming community well, but maybe never to be partisan. And so does that sound right, that actually our job is in some way to form a moral compass or talk about what does justice look like in the context of our communities? How do you all feel about that? Was that a good summary or am I way off?
I really like what you said. I think that our notions of justice have to be grounded in our notions of love, and that we should do everything we possibly can to emphasize the humanity of those who disagree with us. What tends to happen in conflict, certainly in war and in many other kinds of conflict, is that we stop thinking of the people who disagree with us as human beings with which we have something in common. And that happens at all kind of propaganda levels. It can also happen in arguments. It has been said that you can pretty much stop any conversation on the internet by throwing in a reference to Hitler or Nazis. And I also think, words like racist or sometimes liberal and conservative, or even if you pull out an idea like the Bible says in a definitive manner, where using that as a bludgeon rather than an opening, those can be conversation enders rather than conversation enhancers. And we should be careful about that.
So one job of the church is to actually have conversation well in a time when conversations are not going well.
Exactly. In fact, we're one of the few places where people from different economic groups, different political parties, sometimes even, God willing, different races come together and can talk about other things. Those spaces in our society are, I think, decreasing rather than increasing.
Yeah, I'm on board with all this, and at the same time, I feel like there's something in me that's like that common phrase, the job of the pastor is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I hate to throw in all these cliches, but I'm just like, yes, it's about guiding people, to and in the way of Christ, and walking alongside them in that. But also, that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily challenge people. So I will say racism from the pulpit. I won't say like, this is what's happening and, you need to do X, Y, Z, or Z as I say, because I'm Canadian. But I won't say like, this is if you're a Christian, this is what you'll do. But I think it is important to be, I can't really articulate myself well, but I'm a political person with political leanings, and I can't pretend to go up and be some neutral thing that is free from all that. I can do my best to provide a balanced perspective and guide people in the way that I think is faithful. But sometimes there will be political glimmers or, political implications to what I do say in front of people. And yeah, so that's just like a counterbalance to the attempt at neutrality, I guess.
Emily, I'm curious if, as a Canadian, if there's any differences that you've noticed or like engaging in this conversation. To me, it feels very American. So I just wonder, is there any perspective from your background that might show a different glimmer of things? I like that word, glimmer.
A little bit. So yeah, I think Canada, I haven't lived there in 5 years, but is generally less, excuse me, partisan, because there are a number of political parties, not just two main ones. So and our voting system is different. So when we do vote, it's like things tend to move a little bit left or like a little bit right, not like this swinging pendulum that I find in the US. But in terms of politics and faith, we have a less formal separation of church and state in Canada. However, Canadian culture is much more secular than American culture. So even though that separation of church and state is not necessarily as strong on paper, culturally, the kinds of conversations that people are having in the United States, I remember being shocked when I came here. I remember hearing on the radio someone say, "Oh, it's going to be rainy tomorrow, so bring your umbrella to church." And I was just like, you'd never hear that on a Canadian radio station, because you're not assuming that people are going to church. Like, it's just not. I'd say the cultural things are much more secular, which is good in a way and bad in others, I think, to be honest.
Thanks for sharing. I was curious.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you said, Emily, because I love Canada. I moved there. I'm -30 kind of guy. So I serve a church that is very much 50% conservative, 50% progressive. And so from the pulpit, I have no choice but to live in this zone of neutrality. I have had people who have come in and have been guest speakers that have even just come in to do the blurb of communion, like for communion, what the communion offering is the next week. And people have walked out because they have just gotten just a tiny bit political either way. And people have just up and left. And I'm just like, okay, what is going on here? And it is an odd zone to have to live in. Now, granted, I've never really been a political preacher. I have never. I'm one of those people that generally leave it outside of my sermons, even because, again, I'm the type of person, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, that type of thing. So it's a very, because you have brought up this idea of we each have our own way that we lean politically, and you're absolutely right. Like, I have my way that I lean politically, and it is hard in writing sermons, right? Like, I write basically 3 types of sermons, and I meld them together into one because I have to make sure that everything is removed in order for it to get the stamp of approval of the church that I pastor in, and not have people walk out on me weekly. But it's just it's an interesting dynamic where I'm at, because politics are very much a factor in the town here where I'm at. And I've really seen that here in 2020 with the whole mask issue. And it very much comes into the life of the church here.
So I like that bringing up the fact that people walk out.
Oh yeah.
And that's like a reality of being a religious leader is people might walk out on you. Like, and so I guess my question is, so for me, I encourage people, again, to think about virtue, to think about morality, to have a strong moral compass, to think politically and not partisanly, whatever that means. And so, like, one of my rules is people over things. Another rule is like looking at, in the Wesleyan heritage, doing good and doing no harm. And so challenging people anytime there's a big vote or anytime there's a political conversation to ask, like, is your opinion grounded in putting people over things and compassion and doing no harm? Like, let's start there and then build up. So here's my question. At what point for you all is it okay to let people walk out? Like, at what point does politics swing so far one way or the other that it is just mutually unintelligible with Christian values for you? So I guess my question is, where's the line in the sand for you? And at what point does the church, like, for example, let's go to the Nazi thing, because I know Mike was saying anytime you bring it up on the internet, it causes a killer. I want this to be a springboard, but at some point in the German society, the church had to say, this is where we start to speak out. And the same thing was true here at Jim Crow, segregation and laws. The church had to speak out. So at risk of showing all your cards on the internet, at what point for you is that sand in the line, or the line in the sand?
Do you want me to go first since I'm the one that brought it up?
Sure, we can come to your church and start tearing down statues.
Yeah. For me, I never have an issue when people walk out, because for me, you have to be willing to engage in the conversation after, right? That's the hard part. And I'm willing to do that. You know, I've often found that the scriptures kind of speak, and there's, you know, we may get into this at another point when we talk about the hardest sermons that we have to preach. There's some weeks where I don't like the text that I'm preaching on because it's preaching at me. And I want to walk out. But the problem is I can't, because I'm uncomfortable with what the scripture is saying because of whatever is going on in my life at that time. But the reality is that if that person feels that they have been heard or whatever it is, and that enables a conversation to take place, then I'm okay with it. Because my hope is that if they have made themselves heard visibly, and this is coming from a learning experience, because we all have them as pastors, as individuals, whatever occupation we're in, hopefully we are learning, right? That is ultimately what we want. We need to be able to learn in whatever occupation we are in. Hopefully those people are willing to come back and engage in conversation. And hopefully I have done my job as a pastor where when I call that individual, they know that I am going to be open and that I am willing to listen to their side of things and that they will engage in dialogue with me. Now, thankfully, I'm at a place where I have that kind of reputation, and that's great. And that's what I look for.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to say, on this issue, I'm happy to let people walk out, you know, and on this one, I'm not, or like how far in whatever direction. I think part of it depends. I think for me, it's kind of like a principle thing. Like if I'm saying what I believe to be the truest thing I can say about Jesus Christ, God and the Holy Spirit, you know, Father, Son, and Spirit. If I'm saying what I believe to be the truest thing about God that the church needs to hear right now, and someone walks out, I'm okay with it. You know, there are lots of true things about God that people don't need to hear every week. You know, that's preaching. You have to be selective. But I think that's kind of like the principle I work from. I also recognize, and I hate to bring up like language that is often like construed as political, but I also recognize that everyone on this call has white privilege, to say, you know, the least. And I think many, you know, it depends who you are. I recognize that there are some people who can't hide from the issues of racism, right? And just being themselves in the pulpit this is a life or death thing. So it's different, I think, depending on who you are, what you're willing and what you're privileged enough to allow to be your barometer, for what's controversial or whatever. I know, so I'm bisexual, so my partner is a woman, and that would be enough to make a lot of people walk out of a church, depending on the church that I'm in. So there's a line I can't really do anything about. But yeah, so that's just kind of like my lived experience, and there's more or less ease with different leaders in the pulpit, for what it's worth.
So I've never had anybody walk out during a service, but I've had people leave the church. For
Lucky
me,
you.
I think
it's quite an experience.
yeah. For me, I think part of the reason that can work is that I pick the things I'm going to speak strongly about very carefully, and I try and make my case from the Bible as solidly as I possibly can. I guess the two examples of political issues that I address from the pulpit pretty directly would be a couple of summers ago, the current administration's policies of separating children from their families who are coming over our southern border. There was a lot in the news. And I feel like if you can't talk about the widow and the orphan, which are so spoken about people fleeing danger, seeking refuge, if that's not a biblical issue that you can talk about, I don't know what is. And I invited people to talk to their legislators about that. The other one was in 2003 when we were getting ready to go to war in Iraq. And I actually took what was a typical stand for many theologians in those days. I was in good company with Roman Catholic bishops and mainline leaders that this did not fit any kind of notion of just war theory and was not either good policy or morally defensible. And what helped me after that sermon was the retired pastor in the congregation who was a veteran stood up and, said how much he appreciated it and led some prayer about that. So there was support from the community. So politics will get mentioned, alluded to, used as an example. That's not uncommon. But to take a really direct political stand and invite action has been fairly rare in my ministry.
And I think, sorry, going off of kind of what Mike is saying, you have to pick your moments. If you're going to do it every week, it's the same thing. You can't beat people up every week. Nobody likes it. Otherwise, it feels like a boxing match. Nobody, people work 5 days a week. The last thing they want is every Sunday, or in our case, Saturday or Sunday, going to church and then feeling like it's another work day because they've been beat up for 12, 15, 20 minutes. You got to pick your moments.
Yeah, and I'll say, in getting to know the church that I'm serving right now, getting to know people, just individually calling them up. That's one of the things I've learned, that they come right out and say, I don't like it when church is political. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll see. But, I don't like it when church is political. There was a pastor here 100 years ago, not 100 years ago, but several years ago, who, had our church on the front page of the newspaper every week, and, it was exhausting and da-da-da-da. So, yeah, I think there's striking a balance between giving the people what they want and maybe what they need. But I agree. I think if you're standing up every Sunday with a really strong political message, it's not doing justice to the gospel, I don't think. And it's definitely not going to be well received.
So it sounds like for some of you, the line in the sand, or maybe I should say a preference, is there's a preference towards the church standing with the poor, the oppressed, the widows, the orphan. And that's sort of like, if there was a scale, the church starts with the people who are being harmed as sort of like, this is the side of the fence we're going to lean towards. And then from there, engaging in conversation, thinking through, like, what does it mean to be a compassionate person right now? What does it mean to be like, so Mike, I appreciate you bringing up war, because that's sort of a near and dear conversation in my heart. And violence at large is something I think about a lot. And I remember a church, so I'm not going to name the church, but it was a big church in Texas, and it was right when Syria was falling apart. And a lot of people had bad information about why things were happening the way they were. And, surprise, surprise, bad information still around. And I watched this video of this pastor at a mega church saying, we're going to bomb and I can't remember if he used the word HE double hockey sticks or if he used the word heck. We're going to bomb the heck out of them. And then the congregation cheered. And I remember thinking, first I thought, this guy's willing to literally damn people to a fiery death, but not willing to say the word hell. So he's willing to create hell. He wants to vote for that, whatever that looks like. He's not even willing to say the word. And I thought, what weird politeness factor in that. And then the second thought was, how is it that like at any point a church could cheer? And it really made me stop and think, at what points do I cheer at the demise of others? And is it ever okay, even under the most justified situation and circumstances, is it ever okay to cheer for the destruction of another human?
You can only cheer for that if you don't think of them as a human being that is like you.
Yeah.
If you've dehumanized them into some kind of an abstract symbol or problem, then you can cheer.
Yeah, we only ever bomb monsters, right? We never bomb a father
Right.
or a mother. We never bomb a child. That's such a great point. And I think that no matter where the political spectrum lands at your church or congregation, it sounds like the task of the religious community is to say, yeah, there's evil in the world. Yeah, there's all kinds of injustice and oppression. But we have to start from the fundamental truth that we're talking about human beings first.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually leans towards the people we're oppressing, but sometimes it's how we talk about enemies too.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a good line in the sand, is the moment politics becomes dehumanizing, the church can no longer engage in that. And that, I hear it all the time right now.
Yeah.
Democrats are like destroying the world. Republicans, Trumpers are ready to start the next fascist state. And like, there's a lot to talk about, a lot of truth to start sifting through. But one thing is for sure, it's that I know Trumpers and I know progressive liberals, and both sides of that spectrum, those are human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's where we draw the line.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
All right, we've solved it. If only I'll just forward this video to the president, and we'll be good to go. Well, thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation today. I hope for those who are watching, it's been helpful, and you get to be a little fly on the wall in conversation that pastors normally have in private. And until next time, thanks for joining us.